Hi there. Welcome to Real Talk, a space where psychology meets culture, community, and unapologetic truth. We are Dr. Denise Watkins and Dr. Erica Dawkins, two Black psych types at different stages of our careers. We're here to unpack the real life issues that impact our mental health, relationships, and resilience in a revolutionary way. From trauma to triumph, therapy to theology, we hold space for healing, growth, and the conversations that we feel our community deserves. This is Real Talk, raw, relevant, revolutionary, and rooted in love. And so today, the title of our episode is Ice Cold, Managing Emotions and Action in Response to Recent ICE Violence.
Yeah, thank you for the introduction. And just want to give a little shout out to my mom for helping me with this title, brainstorming. We wanted to come up with something that really aligned with what maybe people are experiencing, feeling when it comes to talking about ICE and all the things that are happening with immigration enforcement in this country. And so we wanted something that actually really hit. And I feel like that title actually aligns with what all we're feeling in this country right now. And so before we really jump into talking about everything about ICE enforcement and what's been happening over the last couple weeks in the U.S., I really want to start off by acknowledging how heavy this topic may be when we're discussing this, and that it's very important for you to take care of yourself in whatever way you see fit. We will be talking about ways to manage emotions, so if you're able to stick around and listen to that, or if you want to skip ahead to get to that part, feel free. But please take care of yourself and the others around you while you may be partaking and listening to this discussion. So we're going to just start off by talking about the fact that there are some statistics floating around in the media stratosphere discussing how many individuals have unfortunately been killed by ICE. And so in the last year, which would have actually just started when you think about that, thus far in 2026, they say that 8 people have been killed in interactions with ICE or while they were in ICE custody in detainment. And so that was said by The Guardian. However, there are some discrepancies about information on the internet. And then as well as in 2025, The Guardian stated that there have been 32 people that have died during interactions or while in custody. And that is actually the highest amount that they've seen since 2004, and also the sharpest increase that has occurred since 2020. So the number of people that are currently being held in ICE detention on any given day has actually increased by over 75% in the last year. And by the end of November 2025, ICE was using 104 more facilities for immigration detention than at the start of the year last year. And that's about a 91% increase. So the Trump administration has dramatically changed the profile of who is being arrested by, increasing the use of at-large arrests. So if you've heard about this, this is called the ICE Major City, initiative. And so they're going out into American communities, and this arrest has increased about 600%, leading to an unprecedented deployment of the federal law enforcement agency called ICE.
And I know that one of the reasons that we wanted to kind of talk through this topic today is because of the widespread impact. And so finding that more cities are being occupied day to day, that more Americans are having to navigate this as either their new lived experience or their continued lived experience. I think that in the social media spaces, that's a lot of where the discussion center is minoritized and marginalized folks having had this added to their lived experience, and maybe more previously majority folks and historically majority folks finding this to be a new way of life for them, and wanting to think about how we navigate and manage this collective experience that we're having in terms of ICE-related violence.
Absolutely. I think you for acknowledging that as well, because unfortunately, historically, for some groups of individuals, this has not been a new occurrence. When you think about internment camps, or you think about the ways that maybe Indigenous individuals were kind of rounded up and taken and removed from their homes, or even, when we go and think about how people were separated during slavery, unfortunately, this impact has touched many people of color in the past, but it may be a new experience for individuals who don't identify in that manner. And so, we just kind of want to give additional stats, which is that with the funding provided by the One Big Beautiful Bill, ICE has enough funding to operate upwards of 135,000 detention beds through the end of the fiscal year of 2029. So that would be through the end of the administration's presidency. These changes in arrest practices have led to 2,450% increase in the number of people with no criminal record being held in ICE detention on any given day. And then President Trump's executive order calling for the maximum use of detention has created a no release system where increasingly few individuals are able to seek release on bond. And so by the end of November 2025, discretionary releases from detention fell by 87%, which essentially means that once someone is detained, they're not able to legally leave in the same manner that they should be by paying a bail bond. With release on bond no longer an option for many people seeking relief and deleterious conditions inside of the facilities, immigrant individuals are increasingly giving up. As of November 2025, 14.3 people were deported directly from detention for every one person that was released from ICE detention pending a hearing. So that means that there is a, disproportionate amount of individuals being sent to countries either that they originally came from or are not from, in lieu of individuals who are actually being released back home to their families. And then just to give some updates about things that we can expect to see possibly in the next couple months, there are other cities that they're outlining a decision to show up and to enforce in a similar manner to the way they are in Minnesota. And these cities are Chicago, New York City, San Diego, Los Angeles, Springfield, Ohio, Charlotte, North Carolina, San Francisco, Oakland, and also possibly Philadelphia.
Yeah.
And so when we think about that, this is going to impact a disproportionate amount of major cities. Obviously, it could possibly spread to the suburban and rural areas as well that surround those cities. And it's very important for us to prepare ourselves in a manner where we are able to assert our rights and do that safely, right? And make sure we're protecting ourselves and others as well.
You know, Denise, one of the things that I was thinking about as you were kind of sharing some of the losses and the impacts to the detention centers as well, when we look at the lives lost due to capture by ICE or actually murder by ICE, there are even situations where folks are either kind of being lost due to deportation, but we also have seen like passing due to medical conditions not being treated and not having appropriate medications or things that are needed to care for oneself, as well as folks dying by suicide, unfortunately, and similar to what you mentioned in terms of choosing to be deported rather than kind of pace time with being released, also kind of choosing to end their life due to the stress as well. And so I think that's important to acknowledge, and one of the reasons why numbers may be hard to track and follow as this process unfolds, especially with the increase in uptick in behavior.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, there are records being kept, but even from my own research, I could see that, the information was discrepant from what other information says. And so it's, absolutely unfortunate if someone were to experience detainment, but also thinking about the effects of the environment, their mental health, the ability to reach family members, to reach individuals that may be aiding in the fight to release them, like lawyers and other litigators, that can have a negative impact on a person's outlook for the future. And so we just want to be mindful that there's impacts that we're maybe not even aware of. There's nuance, there's things that are not being said there. So just to recap that, since 2004, this is been 2025 has been the deadliest year in which ICE, was enforcing. They've only been around since 2004, and that's only 21, 22 years at this point, and yet last year was the deadliest year that they've had. So we just really want to highlight that, as this enforcement is increasing, so is violence, and so is the fatality of individuals who are coming into contact with this enforcement.
And so one of the things that I think we are all experiencing is this kind of collective response. And as we talked about before, for some groups, it is in addition to other things like discrimination and profiling that they may have experienced up until this point. And so we recognize that the responses are different. I think, Dr. Watkins and I were talking about how in different spaces, there's different ways in which folks are coping. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that in terms of the impact of mental health. But there are also different things that we can do. And we all have choice and agency, and there may be different reasons that we find ourselves more engaged now or less engaged. And so definitely want to talk a little bit about some of the responses and increase in response to ICE in the maybe most recent weeks.
So there's been massive public protests, as if you've been online, if you've been watching the news, if you've been reading the news, there has been extensive coverage of the protests that are occurring in Minneapolis, specifically outside of the Whipple building. And so the ICE out rallies have occurred, with some protests remaining peaceful, while others, despite confrontational tactics. And then there was actually legal action from the ACLU of Minnesota, where partners filed lawsuits some of them Hussein versus Noam, Tincher versus Noam, which is challenging the warrantless arrest, the racial profiling, and the violence that has been against people who were observing or participating. An acknowledgement of how deaths have occurred. We want to really just, at this point, first and foremost, acknowledge that individuals of all walks of life have been impacted by ICE. And specifically, although, the recent killings of Renee Good and Alex Preddy were heavily publicized, there were individuals from the Latinx culture, from the Indigenous culture, individuals who identify as Black or African American, who also have died by the hands of ICE. And I think one of the really important discussions that was happening online and in social media was the acknowledgement that this type of police brutality or this type of institutional violence has been being enacted against specific people of color, especially those who identify as Indigenous, Latinx, Asian, and Black, all throughout the history of the U.S. And so, we want to acknowledge that, all human lives are very much important, and that when certain people experience violence, it highlights it in a different manner. And everyone does deserve, empathy and acknowledgement, especially when their life has been taken.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things that we talked about is in kind of the social media space, how marginalized and minoritized groups are being asked to kind of call, there's a call to action out. And that sometimes the response for minoritized and marginalized individuals has been like, I've done enough.
Yeah.
I fought the fight.
Absolutely.
And there's been a lot of reference to like being able to predict that something like this was going to happen with the most recent presidency. And so one of the things that I know that you have some expertise around is this concept and what we are now seeing like bold and in your face, and even from our federal government in terms of the endorsement of what folks would refer to as like white nationalism. And so wondering if you can talk about like why all of a sudden now white nationalism is a problem for more folks than just brown and maybe like minoritized, marginalized folks.
Yeah, white nationalism is a very rigid structure, right? And it doesn't really allow a lot of space or flexibility for breathing room or for people to be different and not adhere to what white nationalism is. And so what I believe that we're seeing is the crumbling of white nationalism, because individuals who identify themselves as white are showing up to these protests, are active supporters of the individuals who are being harmed by this protest, and are being in community in solidarity with individuals that white nationalism says that they should not be. And so, take Alex Preddy, for example, an individual who was exercising their Second Amendment right. He did not have his gun unsheathed. He did not have his gun in his hand. You would almost think that somebody who espouses white nationalist beliefs would never look to him as a threat. And unfortunately, that has turned on its head, which shows that if white individuals who are formally protected under white nationalism are also going to be harmed or unsafe, that means that the majority of us who are not under that distinction, right, if we identify as anything other than white, we are definitely not protected, right? And so, unfortunately, the way that this goes is that if you're an enemy of white nationalism, you're an enemy. And it doesn't matter whether you're white, Black, Asian, Indigenous. If you're not espousing their beliefs, you're going against their grain.
And so from what you're saying, it sounds like we are more likely to see not just maybe breakdowns in the structure of an organization like ICE that begins to include people who are against being able to allow ICE to move in the way that they are being instructed to move, that they might be eliminated or get in the way or be captured right along with intended targets.
Yes.
But it sounds like, from what you're saying, that we might also see this breakdown in structure in other areas in which white nationalism is kind of the foundation.
Absolutely. I think we're already seeing it, right, within the government. Individuals who maybe formally espouse that ICE was all that they needed to kind of clean up the country, make the country safer, are now discussing their desire to defund, right? And so individuals who identified as Republican, some of them are coming across, their party lines to support the defunding of this group. And why is that? Because certain people are now unsafe that were previously protected. So why not, go against what you originally said that, was important.
And I think even kind of problematic, right? I think that's a part of a lot of the discussion is like, it was problematic when it was, or the certain behaviors were problematic when it was just a particular group. And now that we've got other groups participating in those behaviors, we've got some wavering. Now when it seems like also lines are getting blurred where children are not safe, where, kind of like you mentioned before, individuals that maybe are white presenting or are white themselves are not safe, it's becoming more of a challenge. I would also argue that it's our mass consumption of what's happening and the fact that people are documenting in real time their interactions with ICE that can't be wiped away or kind of, modified. People are posting in real time, and so there's not a way to write a narrative that is more favorable. People are able to see in real time what's happening, and I think it's that like mass observation too that is causing some of the challenge that we might have even in terms of managing our own mental health, even if we haven't been directly yet impacted.
Absolutely. I mean, when you think back in history, the civil rights movement was galvanized by the fact that it was being shown, the things that were happening were being shown on the TV. And specifically even Emmett Till, the picture of Emmett Till, right,
Absolutely.
in Jet magazine was one of the galvanizing mechanisms that made people come out and march and be part of this. So again, documentation is a positive in that it might help us get things seen, and you can't hide the truth.
Right.
But on the flip side, is it possibly also desensitizing us or influencing selective empathy, right? And the fact that people are seeing harmful, violent acts being done, things that you shouldn't be witnessing maybe on a regular basis, and so I feel like it's possibly that affecting your ability to have a consistent response because you may be overwhelmed, or it could be your nervous system is overreactive at this point, seeing these kinds of things on a regular basis. And so, one of the really important things is that we figure out ways to protect ourselves, where we can remain informed, but maybe not be misinformed or over-informed, right? Or overwhelmed by the information. So, yeah.
Yeah, and when you talk about kind of being desensitized, that may mean, kind of our reactions to hearing about another person impacted by ICE violence is less than reactions that we may have given last year at the start. Also, this idea of selective empathy, and we've talked a little bit about this around groups' frustration around when there's outcry or some movement towards solutioning when a particular person or a person with particular identity characteristics are being seen as impacted versus others. And so similar to your point, we've got to kind of all think about what we have in terms of capacity to be a part of this conversation for the good of all folks. And I don't know, and I'll say this kind of transparently, I don't know that marginalized and minoritized groups have started to really be able to see that coming behind an initiative like this will do anything for historical things and systemic things that have been experienced. And it is one of the things that, kind of we can collectively fight against, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
Because there is this, even albeit late for some people, this buy-in around needing to address what's going on and restructure it.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we don't want to push on anyone that, it's no one's sole responsibility to fix this problem. But, like you said, collective, together, community, right? There's been so many things that as a community, as individuals of all diverse, races, backgrounds, colors, creeds, we've been able to move forward. And the point of it is for all of us to have a future, a humanity that we can live for. Who knows, if we all were to say, it's not my problem, whose problem does it become? Right.
Yeah. And I think it's important finding that space and being able to manage our well-being while we do it. And so that's really the, kind of meat and potatoes of what we want to talk about today. I had shared with Dr. Watkins that because of other things that I feel like I'm managing, other assaults that are happening in real time in life, that, sometimes my energy around being fully informed, especially as information changes day to day about things like what's happening as far as ICE violence, can be limited. But I try to think about what my roles and responsibilities are, where I do have capacity, and how I can kind of manage my own awareness. And so I want to kind of share some strategies that include things like, kind of social media fasts and media fasts in general that can help. And so in this time, even if you have not been maybe, and I'm using direct in quotes, like you have not been picked up or detained or stopped by ICE yet, we all might be experiencing things like a level of grief loss of what we thought were previously protected ideals and values within the US. Things like rage, or maybe even a sense of hopelessness, fear and concern about whether or not your city will be next. All of those are legitimate reactions to what we're having in terms of this level of assault. And it may be compounded by our own personal trauma histories or our own historical or generational trauma histories. And it is, one of the things, counter to desensitization, counter to selective, outrage and empathy. You're having some concern and being distressed, and our having concern or distress is a healthy sign that we are attuned, that we are, kind of present, that there's a moral awareness about what's going on, and that empathy remains. And so it can be helpful for us to say, like, our bodies are having a natural reaction to the threat of real harm. So this is like a real reaction because there's a real threat, there's real harm, that we're not overreacting just because the violence hasn't come to us, but this is a legit reaction, that we're responding to injustice and, like we said, loss of values or loss of sense of safety in some way.
Yeah, so we encourage engagement in grounding practices before, during, and after engagement with material, like in the news, within social media, if you're listening to it on the radio, all of those mediums. And so, there are activities such as the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 grounding activity, where you will start with the senses, right? You start with 5 things you can see, and then you move through all of your sensory modalities. And by that point, hopefully you've been so externally focused that what goes on within will not maybe take over as much. Putting your hand on your heart, taking a nice breath from that diaphragm, nice and slow breathing, right? There's also the box breathing exercise, right? That's a nice slow breathing exercise, but something where you can kind of regulate yourself through your breath, right?
For those that may not be familiar, I'm trying to think if we've done it on an episode before, but like box breathing is just even breathing. So 4 counts breathing in, hold it for 4 counts before you breathe out, then breathe out for 4 counts, and then waiting for seconds or counts before you take in your next breath. And so you may notice, even right now, that your breathing is differently labored or it's paced differently. And so we encourage like paced breathing as a way to help regulate our systems.
Yeah, that kind of helped me out. And then, splashing cold water on your face, that's something I think many of us do even without realizing it's a regulation tool, but that can help. Or even grabbing an ice cube and rubbing it around your face, around your temples, putting it on your neck. Having that cold feeling, that temperature change can really give a shock to the regulation and the nervous system, and bring you back to center in a way that maybe a warm drink kind of calms you down in a different manner. And then somatic check-ins, like, where am I feeling it in my body? Do I feel it in my chest, my tummy? Am I feeling it in my heart, the way that my heart is beating? Kind of checking in with yourself so that you can kind of circumvent things like panic or shutting down or even dissociation, right? Which we sometimes don't even realize is happening, especially if we're caught up in the pace of a fast life, or trying to keep up with everything. It can be easy to fall in kind of what would they call it? Kind of like stepping away from your own body.
Yeah,
right?
like dissociation, or even like a kind of out of body, checked out state.
Yes.
Right. And so one of the things that we in therapeutic work know is that there's opportunity to kind of bring folks back to present or to even be aware of it. But we might be actively, for protective reasons, be dissociating, kind of out in the world based on what's going on right now. And that can be, challenging for a number of reasons. And so regulating oneself to minimize that can be really helpful.
Absolutely. Also setting limits. So if you have a smartphone, I believe Samsung also has screen time limits, as well as Apple. You can set screen time limits. I've done that. I only get 1 hour. If I use it all up, I can't do it until the next day. And so I think it's very helpful to limit how much information you are getting or taking in. And obviously you can also, make changes to your algorithm as well to kind of, control what information you're getting. If that's something you'd like to do, you just go into the settings and you look up your algorithm, and you can actually choose the kinds of things you'd like to see. And so that also is very helpful. And then finally, avoiding the autoplay videos. If you come upon a video, maybe check in with yourself before you even allow it to play through. If that's something you even really want to partake in, we love to give everyone the option to consent for themselves about what they want and don't want. But maybe before even taking in certain information. You check in with yourself about how it might affect you or affect you later on. And so just being mindful of what you're allowing into your space.
Absolutely. I think finding that balance is going to be individual, right? It's going to depend on what you have capacity for, what you might see as action that you'd like to take around what's happening right now. And so we're not suggesting not staying informed, but suggesting that there are ways that you do that in moderation. So based on the action that you're taking, how much information is enough for you to be able to take action, and before, being able to kind of cut yourself there before it moves into overwhelming and maybe destabilizing, or even kind of creating some stuck points. And so thinking about the type of media, whether there are apps that are more likely to aid in being supportive of getting you to the point of action, or whether there are apps where the way the material is presented is just too much, and should be, kind of regulated for a period of time. And so creating kind of that level of balance that thinks about your well-being as well as being knowledgeable, is what we're encouraging folks to strike. And even being able to turn on those protections when it comes to graphic content. I know that my method is to just kind of try to scroll really fast, but now a lot of social media sites have put warnings that you're clicking into graphic content. And so maybe thinking like, do you need the information, or do you need the visuals that go along with it? And oftentimes those visuals are things that stick with us and can be harder for us to come down from in terms of regulating ourselves as we're trying to find this balance.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, even something as simple as, turning off the news notifications as well. Obviously, if you are looking to be informed about specific things, you can actually turn on notifications for certain things and turn off notifications for others. This is something I did where my news app is still very much available, and when I want to read, I do, but I got constant bombardment from articles specifically about this administration and other things, so I turned that off.
Yeah. And that's okay, right? I think, making sure that we have the information that we need to protect ourselves and others is super important. And, for individuals that may, again, be navigating their own needs, it cannot be healthy or helpful to constantly be bombarded with images in terms of others that are also being impacted. There can be a level of awareness without that constant, flooding. And so when we think about other things that might be really helpful during this time, establishing some practice about how we're going to bear witness in this moment can be really important. Again, things that might be in line with practices that folks may already have. We talked about grief and loss being a big part of this time period as we think about those who have been impacted and lost their lives, given their lives in this way. And so naming those individuals and naming the losses out loud can be really impactful, especially if that is a part of maybe one's already current practice. And a lot of Indigenous spaces and a lot of Afrikaans spaces, that's a heavy practice in terms of keeping one's memory alive. Being able to do things like light a candle in remembrance, or several candles, especially for individuals directly impacted or that we're close to, and even things like moments of silence and recognition before events, especially if those topics are related or even if they're not. But these are communal practices that we can engage in that also help with our mental health in terms of connection.
Yeah, even journaling about it. If you want to, write out free association of thoughts, but even poems, songs, things that resonate with your experience. That is one way to kind of release and acknowledge all in the same way. Again, kind of touching on what was already said. Community lamenting, gathering with other community members, holding vigils, and just gathering in space with other people to kind of lean on and support one another, but also to feel together. And even if you yourself want to focus in more individually, thinking about maybe exploring therapy options, if that's something that is necessary and accessible to you. It is totally fine to come and bring this topic to the table, and a therapist who is very culturally informed is going to want to address that, discuss that, and help you to move through those experiences, because nothing is occurring in a bubble. We're having our lives, and then we are also experiencing what's occurring in our environment. So it makes total sense if that's something that needs to be addressed in a therapeutic relationship.
Absolutely. I think I've been seeing a lot of discourse primarily on threads about like whether or not, if your therapist is bringing it up or isn't bringing it up, what does that mean or say? And I think you made such a great point that like, we are having our own reactions as well, and we are doing our best to show up well to the work that we're doing. And we're humans who are actively impacted, but need to maintain some sort of space for our clients. So you may find that therapists are navigating that in a bunch of different ways. Some are addressing it directly, especially if they support folks that may be directly impacted. And then some are coming from a camp where they are looking for you to bring that in, or looking for us to bring that into our respective sessions. And so I think we just want to encourage folks not to hesitate to feel like you have the space to be able to do that, but while recognizing some of the reasons why your therapist may not bring that up, and that it's perfectly fine for folks to kind of bring those things, especially if there are things that get activated in terms of trauma for individuals, and whether there might be, kind of connected fear depending on the communities that you're in, the members of your family. All of those things are appropriate to bring into the therapeutic space. Even the recognition of where we are in terms of systemic impact of racism, and the fact that now some groups are only just getting kind of activated and behind the charge. All of those frustrations are appropriate to bring, to be able to talk through, so that you don't have to hold them.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, I mean, expressing the anger and acknowledging it, the emotions, it's very important that we allow ourselves to have the emotions we're having, but to acknowledge that they're absolutely normal. And, sometimes screaming is a form of breathing, right?
Absolutely.
That is a way to get a nice, good breath in, is to let out a good scream as well. And so, it's okay to express anger, to have rage or frustration, resentment. These emotions are normal. Also kind of addressing maybe survivor's guilt as well, for individuals who, may feel that, they somehow escaped, while others may still be experiencing harmful, actions. And so, it's very important that individuals allow themselves to have those feelings of grief and to work through them at the pace that fits them, because, those things are going to come up if you are an individual who is directly being impacted by ICE. It's very important to just choose at least one actionable step that can align with your own needs and your lifestyle, your pace, and kind of allow yourself to choose that for yourself, because I think there is a lot of rhetoric about who and what and how.
Getting involved, having to do something, and
Yep.
it can feel overwhelming to think through all the possible things, and also what you maybe do or don't have capacity for.
Absolutely, yeah. So check in with your own boundaries about what you think aligns with what you can and can't do, and get active in that way. And also recovery, right?
Yes.
We when you work out, you got to recover, and it's the same way if you want to be an active activist. There's got to be some time to rest, recover, and then reconvene. And so, allow yourself to be present when you can, and allow yourself to say, I need a moment, I need time, I need more sleep, I need this, that, whatever it is, a good meal. All of that stuff is necessary, because you can't fight, back if you don't have the things that you need for your body. And, communities, right?
Just thinking about the fact that, individually it may seem like actions are small and minute and really not playing into the bigger picture. And so it's important to think about the ways in which we can connect to communities that are doing activism work, or that are putting on protests, or even info sessions, or getting and disseminating information. And so really thinking about the ways in which we can have community-wide impact, so that the individual contributions to that community are felt as well. And really being kind to ourselves and recognizing those small actions that we might take, or the actions that we take within our capacity, are all going to play a role. There's, I think, a lot of pressure, again, in a lot of spaces for us to all do the same thing. But if we're all focused on one thing, then that means that there are 100 or 99 other things that don't get addressed that are equally as important to the large collective push and fight that we have ahead. So definitely being, kind of kind with yourself. I think as two Black psych types, like we talk about, we'd be remiss if we did not know that for folks that have been fighting the good fight for a long time, that even rest is seen as a part of the resistance. And so have seen, like I said, a lot of conversations about this in various social media spaces, about people pushing people that have been fighting for quite some time to fight more. And it's necessary for folks to take a step back, and come off the front lines. It's also clinically, kind of grounded that we can't be pushing all the time. And so, what does it look like to take rest for those groups? We talk about different forms of rest, so being able to retreat digitally, being able to retreat interpersonally, even maybe like spiritual or food. I know one of the things for me when I tend to be stressed is sleep. And food are the first to get like all jumbled up. And so, practicing better sleep practices and then looking at food that you tend to eat when you do get stressed or overwhelmed, and making sure that we're taking care of ourselves in that way is super important.
Absolutely, I agree. I feel like that's the first thing to go is the sleep, and that rest that I need is resistance, so I will take it. Yeah, so some of the resources that we can provide that would also be approaches that you can take if you'd like to get involved. One of them first being going over to the standwithminnesota.com website, and there you can really show up and show out in the way that feels best for you. They are looking for people to assist with helping families pay rent. They have a daily GoFundMe that changes every day, and it's going towards that individual that they're highlighting. They have mutual aid funds, food aid. You can support union members, a diaper fund, even just buying and donating materials if that's something you'd like. But you're also able to help support for mental health and healing work as well, if that's something you'd like to do. There's also a lot of rapid response hotlines that are popping up in the major cities that are, being occupied by ICE. And so, there's one for New York here, which is 229-304-8720. One for California, coined Chirla, CHIRLA. And the phone number there is 888-624-4752. In Minnesota, there's Unidos, Minnesota, 612-441-2281. And then there's a national hotline as well, which is 1-844-363-1423. And that's associated with the United We Dream organization. And there's also CASA, which is a national organization with a 24/7 hotline. They're actually very active right now in DC, Maryland, Pennsylvania, but they also respond all throughout the country. And so their hotline number is 888-214-6016 to report any ICE activity in various states. And then here in Pennsylvania, there's the Nationality Service Center and HIAS Pennsylvania. They're also helping to provide legal support, social services, and representation in Philadelphia and the surrounding areas for individuals who may need legal immigration assistance. And then there's a bunch of different local coalitions that can be supported. So like I said about CASA, but there's also called Make the Road New York. There's one in Illinois, the Coalition for Immigrant and Refugee Rights. And then the National Lawyers Guild, they actually have trainings that volunteers can get involved with if they want to act as legal observers. They're documenting the police and ICE interactions that may occur at protests. This is something that we want to, highlight is that, you do what goes with what you feel best with, but no need to put yourself in a place that might not be safe in order to ensure someone else's safety.
Sure.
So this is something that if you'd like to get involved, you can actually be trained in a way that will be safe for yourself and those around you.
That's awesome.
And then same with ICE Watch and Migra Watch. They have volunteers who observe and document the ICE raids to deter any kind of harassment. And these are some of those resources. And then for legal aid, there's the Freedom for Immigrants operates a national immigration detention hotline. It also tracks detention facilities and is working to end immigration detention. So anybody who's currently detained, if they had access to the phone, all they would need to do is dial 9233# or hashtag to get support. And they're able to, sometimes just have a natural conversation if they're just looking for emotional support at that time. But they can also ask to be, connected with family members, to get information to family members, also seeking legal support and all of that. And then education. So one of the things that is very important is the Immigrant Legal Resource Center. They provide Know Your Rights cards in 15 or more languages, and also materials to prepare your family for a potential ICE interaction. So if you were to go to this website, you'd be able to procure a card that's written in a language that is inherent to you, as well as any materials on how to safely interact and to keep yourself safe as well as your family. The ACLU also offers videos and materials on your rights and interacting with ICE so that you can protect yourself and others. And finally, the American Friends Service Committee provides resources on organizing and creating sanctuary spaces, which is a very necessary need right now, and fighting against the collaboration between local law enforcement and ICE. Just recently here in Philadelphia, they've been having city council meetings about ways that they can maintain the sanctuary city space here in Philadelphia. And so this is a conversation that can be had not only at the legal and law, city, local level, but this can also be happening in your community. How can we provide safe space for individuals and deter some of the detainment from even occurring in the first place?
Yeah, I know we've talked about one of the at least deficits in our programming and training was even around advocacy and like what does it look like to straddle the fence as a professional and someone who is advocating for what they also believe in.
Absolutely.
And this idea that you can't do it when the reality is that you can. Advocacy takes a bunch of different forms. We're going to be dropping in the description all of the resources as well, and really thinking about what it can look like for us to get active with our local and federal representatives, to be able to really talk about what we as people and Americans want to see when it comes to increasing safety, not just for ourselves, but others that are impacted by, kind of the less regulated behavior right now that is happening with ICE. And so there are a bunch of ways that we can find ourselves leaning into this space. And hopefully out of what we've discussed, there has been both some insight into like what that can look like, but also ways in which you can do it safely and protecting your mental health as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So as we close, we just want to return to like what has carried our communities through every era of hardship, every wave of injustice, and every moment when the world has felt unbearably heavy. Whether we know it or not, community has always been in our solidarity. Our willingness to see one another, to really show up for one another, and to refuse to let anyone's suffering go unnoticed. Community is the antidote to despair as we see it. And when systems are harmful, we gather. And when fear rises, we link arms. And when grief feels too big for one person to hold, we share it so that none of us has to carry it alone. It's that simple act, as well as choosing connection over isolation, that becomes a form of resistance and one that we can all lean into. And so empathy, too, is a force. It keeps our hearts tender in a world that tries to numb us and reminds us every day that we are alive. It allows us to stay human when violence and injustice push us towards shutting down. And empathy is what reminds us that every statistic represents a person, a life, a family, a story, and that our collective compassion has power. And we've seen evidence of that. So as we wrap up and you move back into your day, hold on to this truth. We get through by staying connected. We get through by caring for one another. We get through by standing in solidarity, not just when tragedy strikes, but in the quiet, everyday moments that build resilience and hope and give us something to cling to. May we continue to show up with courage, with tenderness, and with a commitment to each other's humanity, because together we are stronger than any system designed to break us, and together we'll carry each other forward.
Ooh. Thanks for tuning in to Real Talk with Dr. Denise Watkins and Dr. Erica Dawkins. We're here to keep the conversations honest, healing, and rooted in the realities of our community. If you found today's episode meaningful, share it with somebody that you love. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. You can follow us on social media for updates, resources, and behind-the-scenes moments. Until next time, keep showing up, keep speaking truth, and keep doing the work. This is Real Talk.
See you.